And we're back.
And never again is now. Cannot
right.
thank Dr. Wolf enough for coming on, because it does
fantastic.
segue why something like Israel Appreciation Day is so important. You know, the one thing I wish again, we have time constraints, but the one thing I wish I had the opportunity to ask him, it really was, growing up, I always, you heard about the Holocaust, as if you're Jewish, certainly, and even if you weren't, you heard about the Holocaust. There was Holocaust training. But you always wondered, how could this happen? Because there were people in Germany and in the rest of Europe that were good people. Because the Nazis weren't the majority, right?
Yeah.
So how did good people let this happen? And when I see what's going on in this country now, where people are either not engaged, or they don't speak up, or they just let these things happen because it's not happening to them.
Yep.
I'm not sure I totally understand, but I get a better sense of it. And I would have loved his opinion on that, but again, time constraints.
I just really interestingly, when you guys were talking and you mentioned, like, hey, did your parents talk to you about it? Did you guys ever talk about blah, blah, blah? That reminded me of the talk that black people supposedly have with their kids, like, oh, be careful of the cops and everybody hates you, or whatever the talk is. Although it is legitimate. I don't mean to be completely dismissive. I understand. But everyone should be having that talk with their kids. Like, why wouldn't Jewish people talk to their kids about, hey, just so you know, this is what happened and this is what led to it, so that they can be prepared, so that Jewish kids aren't out there like ending up being pro-Palestinian. Like,
well, wait a minute. Time out. I cannot speak for the current generation because I'm an old guy. I can only tell you that in my generation, your parents did speak to you about it. We lost relatives in the Holocaust. Both my father and two uncles served in the war. I don't talk about it a whole lot with people, but, there are very few Jewish families who are not impacted one way or the other by the Holocaust. So current generations, I don't think they talk about it. And they didn't talk about it a lot when I was growing up. You had to ask them about it, right? And, we had relatives who had, the tattoos with the numbers, on it. And it's disturbing. And again, the times were different. Yeah. The government's role was different. The government's position was different, and education on things like that, because it was so fresh and there were so many, Holocaust survivors. It's different now, right? That's why things like, the other thing I wanted to talk to Dr. Wolf about, if you've never been to the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C., you have to go. You have to go to Israel. I agree with him. But there is an exhibit at the end of the Holocaust Memorial tour, right, that I'm not going to give it away, but it has to do with shoes. And anybody who's been there knows exactly what I'm talking about. It is one of the most powerful and moving things you will see in your lifetime, and it stops you in your tracks and it makes you remember, right? And that's the flip side of, never again is now. Well, never again is now only if you remember, right? So we can sort of go from there, especially as Israel is now on the brink of a broader war with Hezbollah anyway, which is something else we can talk about. But in any event, it's good to talk with Dr. Wolf, and it's folks go buy the book. It is a compelling read, and it's a page turner too. It's not like it's a boring read, but it's a personal journey and a great story. We need to segue because 2 weeks away.
Oh my gosh!
Can we talk about SCOTUS?
Okay, there's so much to talk about. I don't know how we're even going to get through everything.
We won't. Where would you like to start on SCOTUS? What was the most important decision that SCOTUS just put out, in your opinion?
Chevron, overturning Chevron.
Have you been reading my crib notes?
No.
You've been reading
No, but Chevron is like by far one of the worst Supreme Court decisions of all time.
All right, so to educate the listeners who don't, so the Chevron deference, right, ruling, I believe it was 1980, it was early, somewhere in the 80s, basically said that when the laws were ambiguous, the judges couldn't interpret the laws, that the judge had to defer to the administrative state, right, or the bureaucrats, basically, in the agencies in the executive branch to interpret this. And the reason this came up is
insane.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, like literally, like if you guys don't realize what Robert just said, is that the Supreme Court subverted separation of powers. So the Supreme Court said it's no longer the administrative branch's job to enforce the law, the legislative branch to write and interpret write the law, and the Supreme Court's or the judicial branch's job to interpret the law. We're just going to subvert it completely, and now we're going to say the administrative state is in charge and they can do whatever they want. Okay, please continue.
Okay, so to back this up a little bit, the case was brought by fishermen in New Jersey and Rhode Island against NOAA, which is National Oceanographic Administration, whatever.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
I forget what it stands for.
National Oceanic and Administrative
yeah, new set of lips.
Yeah.
Got it.
Oops.
Those guys.
Language,
Just look
my
up
bad.
NOAA. Yeah, they have all
NOAA.
those guys. Those guys. So basically, they basically
Oceanic
said
and Atmospheric Administration. Yes. Okay.
Nice to have a computer, ladies and gentlemen, in front of you. So basically what ended up happening is the NOAA issued a ruling under the environmental laws that any fishing boat had to have basically a government employee with them to make sure that they weren't violating any environmental standards. And here's the catch. Not only do you have to have them with you, but you have to pay their salary. Basically, it was $700 a day. And it wasn't really their salary, but you had to pay $700 a day for the privilege of having the government make sure you weren't breaking any regulations. So and that was like 20% of their revenue, right? It's bad enough the fishermen go out and risk their lives to put food on the table, Starkist wants tunas that taste good, right? Not good tasting or whatever that is. But in any event, they file a lawsuit. And if you've ever read Judge Gorsuch's book, which is A Republic If You Can Keep It, he talks about the fact that the real issue here is that Congress abdicated their responsibility because their responsibility under separation of powers was to make clear and unambiguous laws. The laws, 4,000 pages per law, whatever it is ambiguous. So the judges under the Chevron decision would defer to the administrative agencies who basically empowered the executive branch, right, to pass laws, even though they're not passing laws, but they're interpreting laws when it should have been under separation of power of the court. So they've overturned that doctrine, right, which is an incredibly important decision. But I want to read something, because I like to read, because we're going to get to the immunity thing in a second, right? But I want to read you the dissenting opinion. It was a 6-2 decision. Obviously, we know who the two were dissenting, and one of them had to, which is Ketanji, is it Brown Jackson or Braxton John? I forget this stuff. But
KBJ, Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Brown Jack. So Justice Kagan and Sotomayor issued the following, that the Chevron rule has formed the backdrop against the Congress and courts and agencies as regulated parties, and the public have operated for decades. It has been applied to thousands of judicial decisions. It has become part of the warp and woof. I don't know what warp and woof is, ladies and gentlemen, but these are your Supreme Court justices. I just want you to know. This has become part of the warp and woof of modern government, supporting regulatory efforts of all kinds, keeping air and water clean, food and drugs safe, financial markets honest. Judges are not experts and are not part of the political branch of government. Those were the days when we knew what we are not. I don't even understand. I think I'm like reading Joe Biden stuff. Wait, that's what I'm trying to tell you.
I bumped my head. I'm sorry. Was that English?
Right. I'm trying to figure if Joe Biden wrote this, right? Because agencies are experts in the fields, and because they are part of the political branch with the claim to making interstitial policies, and because Congress has charged them, not us, with administering the statutes containing the open question. What? I don't even know what the hell they just said. These are your Supreme Court justices.
What she just said.
Oh, you're stealing a Trump line from the debate.
I am. I'm going to use it
That is a Trump line from the debate.
So much.
I sit here and try, Chevron was thus a fundamental disruption. Oh, well, yeah, it was. So in any event, I sit there and I print out this stuff and I go, what'd they say? At the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that there's still a process to be gone here, because now it's going to go back to the judges to have to interpret the intent of Congress. And really, as we just talked about, the real issue, Ericka, is that Congress is supposed to make clear and unambiguous laws. Because if Congress makes clear and unambiguous laws, then you don't have an issue.
Correct. And that's what they've been doing for years. That's how they get away with all this nonsense. Oh, what is it? Oh, we have to pass it to figure out how much to pay for it. Thank you, Nancy Pelosi. Like, they just pass stuff. They don't care.
Nancy Pelosi said, first we have to pass the bill to see what's in it.
Oh.
Come on.
Was that same difference? That tells you that broad has no idea how much that thing is going to cost, what's required, what administrative state is going to have to be set up to facilitate the thing, right? Because if Congress actually had to write laws, that's what it would have to do, instead of just giving it over to the administrative state to figure out on their own with a blank check from your pocketbook. Like, this is insane. These people are the brazenness with which they are willing to just take your stuff is astonishing to me.
Well,
yeah. So
I get it. So can we talk about now the elephant in the room?
Why are you insulting Donald Trump's weight like that, Robert? I thought we didn't make fun of people's appearances. I don't make fun of people's appearances because, he who lives in a glass house should not throw stones. So that is the truth.
Right. But now let's talk about presidential immunity, because the Supreme Court, as everyone on the planet now knows, has ruled that the president has immunity for official acts. He does not have immunity. And by the way, official acts are defined as they are consistent with his constitutional powers as are enumerated by the Constitution. That's what he has immunity from. What he doesn't have immunity from is unofficial acts, or any acts that are outside his constitutional authority. You wouldn't know that from the way you see it in the press. And then the courts are going to have to, of course, decide, was this an official act under the Constitution or not? But here's the other thing, again, we're going to go back to reading. Where's my little cheat sheet here? So did you see the comment by Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor about assassination?
Very, very interesting. Read it.
Interesting.
Yes.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. So she basically said that when he used a quote, this is what Justice Sotomayor said: when he uses his official powers in any way under the majority's reasoning, he will now be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organize a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune. First of all, they didn't even read the decision. That's not what the decision says. But the hyperbole and the fear-mongering and the taking this whole thing out of context is unforgivable to me, right? You now have Chuck Schumer now calling it the MAGA court. So wait, when they rule for you, the Supreme Court is great. When they rule against you, it's a MAGA court?
These guys are clowns, absolute clowns. And this is how you know that you cannot take any of these people seriously. No taking seriously.
Well, you have to take them seriously. They're half the country, right? I mean, the country, realistically speaking, is divided. But what were they supposed to rule? They were supposed to rule because, again, they're trying to fit the narrative into a predetermined conclusion that President Trump was guilty of insurrection, never been proven, never even really, a court of law. And let's talk about the fallout now from the three cases that are there, right? You have the Jack Smith case, the Department of Justice, right? Whether or not Jack Smith is actually constitutionally empowered very much is called into question. I think Justice Clarence Thomas brought that one up.
Yep.
And then you have whether or not now Judge Chutkan, right, an Obama appointee, has to now narrowly figure out, is there still even a case here for this whole
Correct.
January 6th insurrection allegation based on the evidence.
That's right. Well, and
Right?
this is another example of lawfare, Robert. They knew that
I
eventually.
can't believe
this-
you asked Dr. Wolf about lawfare.
I'm like, listen, I was listening to what he was saying. I'm like, oh my God, like what he's saying is literally what they're doing to their political enemies right now, you guys. They locked up their political enemies.
Right.
They used a bunch of bogus trumped up charges, and they knew that it would take years and years and years to go through the courts, and by then there would be enough damage and enough people will have suffered. Think about that. There are people who have been in jail for the last 3.5 years now that have essentially been exonerated. What happens to them?
Well, hopefully they get released, but they certainly don't get their 3.5 years back or their money or their reputation.
So
I get
on
it.
that note,